everyone, my name is Yuliia and you're watching Multicultural Community Hour. Today we're joined by Iryna Konstantiuk. She has dedicated 20 years to create a natural motivation for her students to learn languages and different cultures at the Department of the Slavic Studies at the University of Manitoba. Good morning, Iryna. Thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with us today.
Thank you, Yuliia. Thank you for inviting me today.
Today, Iryna will tell us what are the benefits of learning Ukrainian as a second language and what opportunities students who take Ukrainian have. Iryna, first of all, I want you to introduce yourself for listeners who might not be familiar with you. So can you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
My name is Iryna Konstantiuk, and I was born in Ukraine. I grew up and did my degrees in Kyiv. I came to Canada in the end of 90s and started working at the Department of German and Slavic Studies at the University of Manitoba, teaching mostly Ukrainian language, all levels of the Ukrainian language, introductory, intermediate, and advanced. And also some culture courses, like Ukrainian culture before 1900, Ukrainian culture in the 20th and 21st century, and also courses in Ukrainian folklore, Ukrainian rites and rituals, Ukrainian fairy tales, and last term I was teaching a Chernobyl course, narratives and environment.
You have dedicated more than 20 years to teach others like Ukrainian language, Ukrainian cultures, and your work and your activities shows how much you love this language and now you pass your life to others. Why did you decide to pursue a teaching career?
It's a very good question. To be a teacher and teach language was always my dream. My grandmother in Ukraine was a teacher. And, as you know, Ukrainian language was quite oppressed in the Soviet Union. I always say to my students, I'm a product of the USSR. I was born and raised in the USSR. I studied in the Soviet Union. And I remember when my parents moved me from the village, because I grew up in the village not far from Kyiv, to the city, to start my school, and they have chosen a Ukrainian school for me. There were only 6 Ukrainian schools at that time in Kyiv, and it was no Ukrainian there. Nobody communicated in Ukrainian, and I was silent for 2 months. And my first teacher came to conclusion that maybe I was autistic or had a disability, and she spoke to my parents, and my parents said, sorry, we don't communicate in Russian. We represent a very Ukrainian family, and very slowly I had to pick up Russian in grade 1. And now I can say that I teach one or few courses in Russian as well.
You as a teacher have a very significant mission to motivate your students to learn language, to keep them engaged. What is your approach to teaching? I think for your more than 20 years of teaching, you have your own approach.
Yes, I love my work. I believe in every single student. I'm convinced that every single person can learn a language. Ukrainian language is not an easy language for English-speaking people to learn. It has, as you know, 7 cases and a very diverse verb system. But it's a very logical language, and if you understand it and if you understand the structure of this language, you're going to be a very successful learner. In my teaching, I try to attract Ukrainian songs. I use films, I use cartoons, I use radio programs, I use discussions. We sing together, and I do believe that through culture and through Ukrainian songs, students can successfully learn the language.
You have said that Ukrainian is very hard language for foreigners, but what motivates them to learn Ukrainian? What are the benefits for them?
First of all, in Canada, we have a big diaspora. We have practically 5 waves of immigration. We have students, we have people with a very strong Ukrainian identity. people who are very interested in learning the language because culture is the language. And, you know, for many years in Canada, the opportunities were quite narrow to learn the language, and now, like, we have tons of opportunities to learn it. And on the other hand, Ukraine is a great country with a huge potential. I always tell my students that Ukraine will need you. You will be able to use your talent in any area you wish. If you're a historian, you know, Ukrainian archives are open these days. If you're an economist, you can use your talent and work in Ukraine. You can be hired by the World Bank, by the European Bank of Reconstruction and Development. And I had few students who actually got jobs there. Mm-hmm. If you are interested in military area, you can work for NATO. You know, and if you are interested in agriculture, you know, the opportunities are immense because Ukraine has the best farming and the best soil, black soil in the world. So if you love culture, Ukraine's culture is booming right now. If you look at music, right? You look at Ukrainian films, you look at Ukrainian literature today. You know, the opportunities are there for you. So, and I always tell my students, you know, you can always apply your talent. You know, and my role as a facilitator to help and create these opportunities for every single student if there is enthusiasm and if there is any interest.
You have mentioned that Ukrainian culture is booming right now, but when you just started 20 years ago, how was the situation? Was there many people who wanted to learn Ukrainian?
It was like a Sleeping Beauty situation. In my opinion, Ukrainian culture and Ukrainian language survived because Ukrainian diaspora was very active. Mm-hmm. Because in countries like Canada, United States, in Europe, we had Ukrainian community that helped Ukrainian language to survive. You know, because the Russification was very strong in Ukraine. And I remember when I started in 90s, the interest was not that high, as you can imagine. And we were lacking textbooks. We were lacking resources. We didn't have any materials in the language lab. We did not have any exchange programs. You know, it was practically like no motivation to students to learn that language, right? Mm-hmm. So I remember when I started, I was thinking it would be great to take students to Ukraine, you know, and show my Ukraine to them. Right, a country I love, you know, its nature and its museums and cathedrals. And in the end of 90s, we initiated a program with Kyiv-Mohyla Academy. Mm-hmm. It's one of the best, as you know, universities in Ukraine. And I started taking students there for a whole month to learn Ukrainian language and Ukrainian culture, Ukrainian mythology, Ukrainian dance, you know, courses in Chernobyl. We had a field trip to the Crimea, or we had field trips to the Carpathian Mountains. We had field trips to Chernobyl. It was a very, very popular program, unfortunately stopped by the war. Another thing we did, we initiated a student exchange program with Lviv Polytechnic University. And when we have students who are quite fluent in the language, or heritage speakers, or Canadian students who mastered the language to a degree that they can practically sit in the same classroom with Ukrainian students, they can actually go for a term or can go for the whole year and learn Ukrainian or take all kinds of courses in Lviv. And that practically offers them a great opportunity to work towards their degree. We had students who studied religion, we had students who studied journalism, economics, you know, political studies, and were quite successful. And they absolutely loved it because in addition to their studies, they also got an opportunity to work or volunteer in Lviv. And actually to travel, because as you know, Ukraine is in the center of Europe and you can go anywhere from there.
Yeah, and especially when you are with a great group of people, with a great team, I think the lessons in the program is much, much better and more interested.
Yes, and you learn the language faster, and you get a feeling like you're part of a family. And it's funny, but I had actually few people who got married, and now they have children, and I was invited to their weddings, and it's great because I'm pretty sure that their children will speak English. Well, sorry, Ukrainian.
Ukrainian, yeah. It was very successful trip for them, I think.
I agree.
Yeah, and I think that for 20 years, your department undergone big changes, and like your program, your approach. What are the biggest changes you have seen since the day you started to work until now?
I believe we became very modern and very innovative. First of all, we introduced interdisciplinary studies, exchange programs. I also developed introductory Ukrainian online course that is quite popular today, and I had students practically from all over the world. We work around developing blended learning. Right, it's a mix of online and in-class studies. Our community is very helpful. We work very closely with our Ukrainian community in Manitoba. Our students can apply to Taras Shevchenko Foundation and get a little bit of financial help towards their studies or travel courses. Also, in general, our community is very generous because students who are successful and have certain plans around Ukrainian language and culture, they are qualified for all kinds of scholarships. And the scholarships are not small. You know, we're talking about thousands of dollars.
Mm-hmm. Were there any key moment when you realized a big development of Ukrainian language and culture, when there were like many interest to Ukrainian?
I would say, from my experience, the first wave was the Orange Revolution.
Mm-hmm.
I remember that after the Orange Revolution, the interest was extremely high. The second wave was, of course, 2014, Dignity Revolution, and annexation of Crimea, the war in Donbass. The interest was also very high. And, you know, after February 24th, I also see lots of interest, you know, to the program. And many people want to support Ukrainians and volunteer and help Ukraine, and it's also reflected on our program.
Mm-hmm. In your opinion, after Ukrainians' victory in the war, will the interest of foreigners to learn Ukrainian become higher or decline?
I believe it will go. It will become higher, and the reason for that is because we need to rebuild Ukraine. Mm-hmm. From what we see, Ukraine is in ruins, and it's going to take us a lot of time, a lot of financial resources to rebuild the country. And as I said before, we need Canadian expertise, we need Canadian knowledge. We need Canadian technologies, like in all areas, in not just in farming, but in construction, for example, mm-hmm. because Ukraine needs Canadians to help and rebuild the country. And that is why I believe that the interest to the language and to Ukrainian culture is going to be quite high.
Another topic I want to touch, you probably know that language issue is very acute among Ukrainians. There is a big issues between Ukrainians who speak Russian and Ukrainians who speak Ukrainian. For many people, language is the strongest tool that unites nations. What is your definition of language and how it is important?
I do believe that language is very important. I totally understand people coming from Eastern Ukraine or the south of Ukraine who give preference to the Russian language. I do understand it because I can feel it, because that's very similar to when I started my grade 1 in Kyiv. You know, nobody wanted to talk to me in Ukrainian, right? So the whole environment was Russian, right? And lots of pressure was coming from Russia, and many people in Eastern in Ukraine, they used to go and work in Russia, right? And right now, we see that many Russian-speaking Ukrainians, our warriors, they fight, you know, and but however, at the same time, we need to understand that the language is our culture and our identity. And we're fighting for our language as well today. We totally understand that if Russians could win, you know, this war, God forbids, the first thing that would be eliminated is the language. So my advice is learn Ukrainian, try, you know, try to speak it with mistakes, with your dialect, but let it be your personal war, you know, because each of us need to contribute to the victory, right? Let it be your personal contribution. You know, teach your kids Ukrainian. And I know many families who communicate, you know, in Russian, but they teach their kids Ukrainian. And I'm very, very proud of them. So I would definitely say that Ukrainian is very important. And as I said, please help and support it, because the language was oppressed for 400 years. The language was banned. The language was never supported in the Soviet Union and was never given enough attention even in independent Ukraine. And unfortunately, the war that is going on today is also mainly that we had so many people who communicated in Russian that gave an idea to Putin that it's a Russian-speaking country and Russian-speaking people who are definitely going to support Russia in this invasion, right? So, and our answer should be no. I hope I answered your question.
Yes, yes. And another one, also very important question is it important for Ukrainian to communicate in Ukrainian abroad? Because sometimes foreigners see that we speak Russia and they like, okay, maybe it's the same, Russia, Ukraine is the same country, your language is very similar. So how it is important for us to show foreigners that we are speaking Ukrainian?
It's very important, because every single Ukrainian is an ambassador if he or she is overseas. You know, whether you're in Poland or in Sweden or in Canada, you know, and if you speak Russian, right, you represent Russian culture, right? In the time of wars, it's very important to communicate Ukrainian because we're messengers. We're sending the message, you know, we are Ukrainians. Otherwise, how would foreigners know that we're Ukrainians, right? I can pick up your accent if you speak Russian, right? I will know, for example, that you're from Odessa, right? But some people don't know. So it's quite important to understand our mission and our role. We represent our country, Ukraine, and we represent our language. So it's very important to communicate in Ukrainian.
In your observation, students who are taking Ukrainian class, what are their motives to learn Ukrainian? Why do they take this class?
Well, there are different students, right? Some students have what I call intrinsic motivation, and some students have extrinsic motivation. Some students with extrinsic motivation, they think, okay, I know a little bit of Ukrainian, or I know Ukrainian, I'm going to take, you know, this language course and get an easy grade, right? It's going to be A or A+. However, very often what happens is they are confused with cases and there is a little bit of grammar involved, right? So, but my favorite are students with intrinsic motivation. That is something that is coming from inside you. This is your inner interest and your enthusiasm. And if you have that, you're going to be very successful because you're going to spend some time on this language. You're going to devote some time on learning it, right? Because to learn any language is a lot of work. as you know. It's not just the language is going to come to you. It's maybe with little kids, if you communicate in Ukrainian with them, the language is going to come to them. With young people and with adults, as you can imagine, we need to devote some time to the language.
What are the biggest challenges for students who take Ukrainian? Where do they most struggle?
It all depends on what kind of learner you are, right? And the biggest challenge, what I observe, is of course to learn and understand Ukrainian cases, right? Because we have 7 cases, and if you understand the rules and how to use them, you're going to be a very successful learner. But I always tell my students, don't miss my classes. Because if you miss one class, you're going to miss that important lesson, and then you're behind. Mm-hmm. So it's very important to be a good learner, disciplined, punctual, and hardworking.
I read comments from students about your work, and they're really very happy to have you. They told that, like, very nice teacher, one of the best. I really love Ukrainian and how she teaches us, so great job. I'm really happy that in Canada people have the opportunity to learn Ukrainian and they are interested in it. It's not like we force them to learn Ukrainian, but they are taking the class and spend their time to learn more about our culture.
Thank you for saying that, because I have students from the Faculty of Engineering, you know, nursing, education, science, not just from the Faculty of Arts. And every time I drive to work, I always think, how can I make my class special today? Mm-hmm. You know, what can I bring to this class for students to feel great, right? Sometimes it's a game. You know, sometimes it's a song. Sometimes it's a tongue twister. Sometimes it's a compliment when we need to say compliment to each other. Sometimes maybe a dance, or sometimes it's a joke. But it needs to be something to make students to feel relaxed and to feel great about themselves, right? To give them that feeling of accomplishment. Mm-hmm. You know, I learned it, I can say it, you know, I can do it.
I see how bright are your eyes when you talk about your lessons.
Thank you.
Thank you. You're giving us so much to think about how it is important for Ukrainians to preserve their identity, to show Canadians who we are, and for Canadians to learn Ukrainian. Is there anything else you want to mention or to talk about?
I guess it's just a wish. I really want all Ukrainians to retain and preserve the language. I want them to teach their kids, you know, and teach them through communication and multimedia and cartoons and songs, because we have such a rich culture, you know, and we need to share this culture with the world. And I'm proud to say that I have 2 kids. I have a daughter and a son, and they're fluent in Ukrainian. And my son was born in Canada, and I think what helped him to learn the language and be very fluent in it is our communication at home. You know, the fact that we traveled to Ukraine, but it also helped him to develop that interest to Ukrainian culture. And he right now he's a filmer and he's working on his documentary about Ukraine. But I think if you preserve the language and help your kids to learn and preserve it, you are making them more successful in life.
Right. Thank you so much. I think it's important not only to learn Ukrainian, but like all languages.
Absolutely.
As much as possible. As more languages, you know, you can see the world is absolutely different way. So
yes.
Thank you for the work you do.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. And thank you our audience for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed. If you like the episode, please like, share and subscribe to see our upcoming episodes.